Yes, I'm with Deputy Vallois, who's, as we know, a few months ago moved from a ministerial assistant job, now on scrutiny. Today it was housing, yesterday it was education. Somewhat different meetings, weren't they?
Yes. Well, today's was a quarterly hearing on housing, and yesterday's was about the specific proposal about the nursery education funding.
Yesterday it was full of people. They were actually, some people couldn't get in, they had to stay at the Royal Square. Today there was virtually no public interest. Mm-hmm. Yet housing, is there no housing problem anymore, do you think?
No, I think it's quite clear that there's a housing problem. I think that's what they've got, a housing strategy, and it's regularly mentioned in the States about issues with accommodation for various different reasons. But I think it's because it wasn't a specific topic. I think it was a very generalised meeting, and it wasn't specifically about something that people, like for example, if it was just about rents or just about mortgages or mortgage interest tax relief, then there may be specific interest.
There are. I mean, it was very noticeable. The contrast between the two meetings. There's a class divide going on, or a finance divide going on. The people who were at the education meeting were concerned about nursery fees, and there were people, it was affecting people, £75,000 a year income. Mm-hmm. Now, the real issues on social housing, which is what most of your conversation today was about, are people who are on nothing like that sort of money. In fact, most of them, quite a lot of them, struggling. Yeah. Now, the people who've got the money are active, so it seems. Mm-hmm. But it's not just that. I mean, there's a poverty inquiry going on. There was virtually nobody at the drop-in they've had. There's one today, I think there's a drop-in today. But virtually nobody in poverty will go to those meetings. Mm. Why can't we activate? Why can't we motivate people? What's so unpleasant about the political process?
Well, I think there's various reasons. That one could be that they don't believe that politicians listen, which I think is becoming an increasingly staunch view of the public now because of the issues that they've seen happen over the last few years in particular. But I think there's also the feeling of a stigma being attached to those on lower incomes, and it's always something that I've heard from various different areas whilst being in the States, is something that you want to try and remove. You want to try and remove that stigma, and that's why they always had these different planning policies about how to have some social housing in a first-time buyer setting or a over 55 setting, so you've got a mixture of low income, high income.
Of course, another obsession with, again, it's not the main topic for today, but social housing almost invariably finishes up being built in St Helier. That's or built-up areas, or some going on in St Clement. But if you try and build social housing in the moneyed parishes, you get outrage. You get the people who've got money, who've got the things. They protest. They object to it. There's this. I notice it all the time. This divide which is developing.
Well, I don't know. It's very difficult from my point of view. The island plan, or should I say politicians over the years, have always turned around and said that we shouldn't build on green fields, and that's quite a strong belief in the island plan. You know, we shouldn't, a green zone, don't touch it. And so a lot of the green zone happens to be out in maybe the more wealthier areas, but we did hear today from the quarterly hearing that there is a Homes Trust building at Dallamar Nurseries, which is Grooville, if I remember. Well,
they were saying, it is, that's right, Dallamar, that's right. But of course, they were talking about also today about the housing, the glass house sites which were rezoned in St Clement against protest from St Clement. They didn't want any more housing in St Clement.
They've got a lot of housing in St Clement.
That's right, and it is. I mean, basically St Clement, as I well know, I live there. It's a suburb of St Helier. That's what it is, a housing suburb. Yeah. There's nothing else in St Clement, just houses.
It's very urban areas.
Exactly.
Much more built up.
This conflict it bugs me. It really bugs me that there is. We talk about one community, and we've got, it's a very close-knit community. But when it comes to the crunch, when there are these issues, extra funding for nurseries, who people, from my perspective, look as though they can afford to send their kids to the nursery, or if they want to send them to the state system, send them to the state system, no problem. Yet there are these people who have the greatest need, and ironically, yesterday the minister was talking about taking the money away from the nurseries, those who can afford it, only in order to transfer the money to people with special needs, children with special needs. In other words, there's no saving involved at all. There wasn't all this talk about a saving. It wasn't a real saving, but it was actually acknowledging that there are people who are disadvantaged. So in theory, if you were to be generous to the minister, it was quite a laudable aim.
I think from his point, he's got a very difficult job, and he has explained that. He explained that in the hearing in terms of trying to balance the books. There's not enough money to go around as such. And he kept on referring back to things like a structural deficit and the fact that we've got no money. Even though you talk about this divide, there's much more to it rather than just the money element. There's various research and reports about the children being able to access early years learning. And it's not just about whether their parents are wealthy enough for them to access it or not. And the issue that comes to it is you look at the UK, they're in much more of a structural deficit and debt than what Jersey is, but yet they're extending their free hours and they're making it more accessible for children, because at the end of the day it's not the children's fault that their parents earn more money.
No, well, it was rather, again, it was all these issues which, it's all complex, because at the previous meeting you had on 21st of March, or you had an expert from the UK, and she was gently warning against going down a UK path on nurseries, and she was sort of saying that's not the way to go. And the minister, in fairness to him, was talking about having greater availability attached to primary schools, building extra spaces, and talking about things which I'd never heard of, concepts, family groups or something in schools, which I'd never heard. Didn't know what it was all about. But obviously, things which will cost money to provide better, basically, nursery facilities of a sort, or coordination between primary and nursery. Now, these things you've got to pay for.
Absolutely.
So where was the money going to come from? I couldn't quite.
He didn't explain that.
He didn't. No.
And that's the thing. They're all laudable aims. You know, they're you know, at the end of the day, I think he's trying to do the best that he can within the money or the remit that he has. But from anyone else's point of view, at the end of the day, it's about the child and the well-being. And if everything is going to come down to the fact that they can't afford it, then when is the fight going to start about what they, you know, whether we need to raise more money in order to meet those aims, or whether actually the priorities are correct?
It does, again, it's going a bit beyond what I wanted to discuss with you, but this not being able to connect together the implications, like it was raised today about the fact that if you've got building a new hospital and you're going to have to recruit key staff from outside, you've got to have housing, and there is no plan to build housing. There is no plan. We don't know how many staff will come in over the next 20, 30 years. There's no plan to house them, and they will all want decent accommodation. Yeah. But it doesn't feature, nobody's thought it out, have they?
No, I mean, the minister did mention the fact that she wanted to look at extending the criteria under social housing, and one of those would be for key workers. But what that looks like, nobody knows. It's just at this moment an idea.
Knowing full well, as I keep hammering on about it, for years and years and years, we've had 10,000, 10,500 working adults and their children who do not have housing qualifications. And they are, I well know, that is the housing problem that is the island's housing problem. The rest of it is relates to it, but it's not the main housing problem. We can't even get it on the agenda to discuss it. It didn't feature today's discussion. No. It's not in the minister's plan. How is it possible?
With regards to the non-qualification sector?
Yeah, people, 10,500 working adults.
I mean, it's lowered over the years. It's now, 10 years, is it, that you have to meet to be qualified? But it should be part of the overall discussion, because it is all housing at the end of the day. It's the overall strategy about how you house everyone on the island, not just those that are qualified.
Well, they're all paying a rent. Whatever they're doing, they're all paying 100, 150 pounds each per person.
And they're paying some form of tax.
And that money that ought to be going to building houses goes somewhere. It's a huge amount of money which could be providing housing for everybody. But all of a sudden we just ignore it.
I mean, it is a concern. The housing strategy, I think the chairman at the hearing today talked about it being fairly wishy-washy. There's a lot of underway and ongoing with their objectives. But like you say, the non-qual sector should be part and parcel of that discussion, because they have to be housed somewhere too. And I think the discussions around the private sector and the ability to have the supply in the private sector to reduce the costs of non-quals accommodation would to some extent assist that, but there's no specific discussion about the non-qual sector itself.
Another aspect which I noticed at the 21st of March, the Minister raised the Convention on the Rights of the Child,
Yes.
and specific articles he drew attention to, and how it related to the provision they provided for nurseries and primary schools and so on. Now, for some reason, that doesn't feature. There's never a human rights question. When I go to scrutiny meetings, it's never features. The panels never asked human rights questions. They've got all these human rights international obligations, such as the rights of the child, but nobody's got a clue what they actually mean. Nobody ever asked, well, how does this impact upon that obligation?
I think we did ask the question about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Specifically, I think it was Articles 15 and 18.
Well, he raised it. At the last meeting, it was him who raised it.
Okay, well, I mean, it's something that should be considered amongst, depending on the topic review, of course. It's something
Because-
that should be
specifically
considered.
because-
But we have an obligation this year, for example. If you look under ministerial decisions, we've got to report to the UK with where we are with meeting the Rights of the Child Convention, and we're in the process of doing that in terms of reporting to the UK.
Yeah, well, there are specific UN reports, Council of Europe reports, where you have to report every few
Yes,
years on
yeah.
specific how you're.
But this is the first time we're doing it.
Well, they've been ongoing for years and years. I've been reading the
Well,
Convention.
the United Nations Convention on the Rights
The
of the
Convention
Child
has only just been ratified, of course,
is
but there
only
are other
recently
ones.
been ratified
There
to
are other
Jersey.
ones, but the public of the Jersey has got no idea what's required of them under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There was one little presentation at a school, a little PR event, but the general public haven't got a clue what's in there. So it never. The group that were the discontented people who came here because their nursery provision was likely to be reduced haven't thought to go and look in the Convention on the Rights of the Child and see what it says about the provision of nursery education, primary education.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of people, are busy with family and work life, and that was a very short period of time where something was released, and then there was a lot of uproar, and there was a lot of concern, and there was then the public scrutiny meeting. I mean, it's something that certainly at the meeting we're due to have on Wednesday next week is something that we could certainly bring up and discuss
again,
with
I'm delighted
people.
that you're having that meeting. I wish there was follow-up meetings of that sort on many aspects of scrutiny, because the public are not allowed to participate. You go into the meeting, you'll sit there and be quiet and say nothing. There could be a facility for the public to say something at the end, but to actually call the meeting, but for the minister to turn around and say he'll have to look in his diary whether he can attend, I thought was a bit of a cheek. But, the public wants to be able to participate.
Yes, yeah. Well, in a lot of circumstances they do. I mean, but you only mentioned before that there is another scrutiny panel that are actually going now out there trying to actively get people to participate, and they're not. And so, I mean, I've only come into scrutiny. Well, I've only been here for about 4 or 5 months now. And from the Education Home Affairs panel point of view, I understand they've done this before and had a public meeting to do with the school starting
I think
age.
the difference is, if you've got the guys here talking around the table at a scrutiny meeting, you're asking them questions, and sometimes the answers they give you do not bear much resemblance to reality. And if you've got members of the public actually sitting here listening to the discussion and say at the end of the meeting, here's 10 minutes for the public, would you like to say something? I think you get a different response. Calling people to come to a town hall, a dead town hall, it puts them a bit, the onus on the public. They're not very well researched. It's a different scenario. I know a lot of it is laziness, I feel sure, and political lack of awareness. But in this sort of situation, if you can get people to come to the scrutiny, knowing that they can participate, they can say their bit at the end of the meeting, whilst it's fresh in their mind, they've heard what's been said, I think that would add to knowledge a bit.
But that could also cause chaos, could it not? I mean, the amount of people that were in here yesterday.
Yeah, well, you're fortunate. You've done the right
thing. If you asked
thing.
for everybody to, you have to manage the situation as and when it arises. I mean, there was a lot of people here yesterday. To have everybody, ask the minister questions at the end.
It was a special meeting.
The purpose of having the hearings is to obtain evidence from the department in a public domain.
Yeah.
and to have things put down in black and white, and so people can hear the minister's response. It's holding the minister.
Which you fortunately did, which was rather extraordinary. You put up the podcast straight away.
Yes.
So that's unusual, because the previous podcast that I could find from Educate was last November.
Really?
So I don't know what's happened to all the other ones. I don't know what's happened to one for the March the 21st, actually. Is that podcast gone up?
I can find out for you.
Because this is the one of the public are in a grave difficulty, because the things have lost their spontaneity. If you have to wait 3-4 months before you get the podcast or the transcript appeared.
Well, it shouldn't be the case. I mean, I was in scrutiny when they brought in the podcasts, and it was supposed to be the podcast would go up literally within the next 24 hours, because the transcript takes a little bit longer, because there's editing guidelines and there has to be factual checking that everything's correct.
We've wandered a little bit off what I wanted to discuss, because I had so many things buzzing around in my head. But today's meeting, it's probably for me, okay for me to say it, probably not for you, a very weak minister for housing. I mean, I don't want to be unkind to the lady, but basically not up to the job as far as the urgency, the gravitas of the problem of housing. You need somebody who's fighting the corner for housing, for providing the houses that are needed. And this minister clearly is not doing that. Now that you've come back into scrutiny, you were in scrutiny before, you've come back to it, what do you make of it now? Is it going where you want it to go?
It's not the scrutiny I remember it to be. It's unfair for me to really castigate the way that the scrutiny members are running it, because it's up to the politicians that are on scrutiny to run it. So it's the chairman's committee and the chairman that basically have the vision and how they deal with what scrutiny does over that term. But I have to say I've been extremely frustrated. I'm on 2 panels that literally scrutinise 5 different departments, and we haven't had a work programme for any department. And I myself have approached them and I've said, look, we need this information. You should be providing us a list of what you're doing so that we can do our work programme, so we can review the areas that need to be reviewed, that are urgent, so that when it goes to the States Assembly, like legislation, because scrutiny has been told off for not doing enough legislative scrutiny, then we are prepared and we've done the work and we've done the scrutiny, and the States Assembly are well-rounded in terms of being informed. But we're not even getting the work programmes. Well,
I was very impressed yesterday's meeting with the Education Minister. It was not a cosy chat, was it? He was not allowed to feel comfortable. No. Now, I can't say the same of today's meeting, today's scrutiny hearing. It was more like a cosy chat around the table. I mean, there were only 3 of you on the scrutiny panel, which should have been sufficient to ask all the questions. But even so, it's a very small number. I've been to scrutiny meetings where there's only 2 on the panel. Yeah. And it's not adequate, is it? You're only going to get a cosy chat. That's all you're going to get. You're not really going to ask the in-depth questions and get the answers to come back.
No, I think the issue is I think it depends on the topic at the time. The quarterly hearings, to me, I feel is become much more of an information gathering exercise rather than actually holding the minister to account. Whereas, like you saw yesterday, you had a specific topic that was being looked at. So you can get your teeth into the information around the ins and outs of how all the policies interact, and you can really press the minister.
And it was a response to a large extent to a public outcry which came from it. And of course, the way that the minister had treated you on the March 21st, he knew the information, he had it in his head, and he could have said on the March 21st scrutiny, look, we're proposing this change. He didn't do so.
There was an ability to do so.
And there was a public outcry. And there will be a follow-up public meeting, which is the way scrutiny ought to work, really. But if the minister's not there at the public one, I should be very disappointed anyway.
Well, we'll find out whether he's available or not.
So, what can we do to improve the situation? What are you going to do? What are you going to? What door do you knock on to improve scrutiny?
What door do I knock on? I knock on the chairman that I work under. The chairmen are ultimately responsible for running the reviews and the hearings and the way it works. And it's up to the chairman's committee to change whatever needs to be changed and basically make sure that the ministers provide information. But I personally have been going to departments and saying we need work programmes, we need information. I've been hounding my chairman and saying, this isn't acceptable, we should be getting the information, we should be sharing the information so that we can do the right piece of work. I was rather astonished that we had the director of education yesterday telling us how scrutiny should work.
Yes, I thought that was very good that he was put in his place, because it wasn't his job.
Well, it just shocked me, and then afterwards it was more of his experience of the local council context. Well, the local council and the UK government are very different to Jersey and the Jersey government, and we have one political party. It's a very different scenario.
I mean, it would be nice if scrutiny could go do run the parishes, but of course you can't take all your recording equipment with you, so it would be difficult, but it would be nice to take it out there, wouldn't it?
I think there's a way for us to... I mean, we have had hearings in other places before. I mean, I just off the top of my head, I remember when I was on the Fort Regent review, and we had a hearing up at Don Theatre in Fort Regent, and people attended that. So we are able to move to other
I suppose the Pomodoro meeting will have that. Presumably will be subject to podcast and transcript the same as well.
I assume so, but I can get back to you and let you know.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell me?
No, I think we've pretty much gone through it all.
Okay. Thanks a lot.